Hello, fellow air gunners. Today I want to share with you a modification I did that helps to support my otherwise also heavily modded Air Venturi Avenger in 25 caliber. As you can probably tell by the pile of parts, I've done all kinds of stuff to this thing. In terms of power adders, I've got two plenums, I've got the bottle conversion, lighter valve spring, lighter valve, larger valve hole, peak poppet, heavier hammer spring, hogged out the transfer port, as you can see by the larger set screw that I had to put in its place, and hogged out the barrel port, polished the regulator. You name it, it's probably been done if you can find a video for it online. So if I had to guess, the thing's probably pushing about 100 foot-pounds of energy, or FPE. At some point you get to where, if you want to be sending a slug, especially downrange, as fast as possible, but not supersonic, it's got to get heavier and heavier and heavier. And at 100 to 110 FPE, depending on your altitude and the moisture content in the air and the temperature on a given day, you could be getting a 46 grain slug up to the transonic region, anywhere from 1025 to 1075 or 1075 FPS. So it drove me on this quest to say, okay, well, if I want to run an even larger bullet than that, or a heavier round than that, I'm going to be running into a problem with just what I can fit into the stock magazine. So first I wanted to show you some of the slugs and a pellet that I tried, and where I found the upper limit of the stock magazine to be for the Air Venturi Avenger, and then I'm going to share with you what I decided to do about it to increase that capacity. The nice thing about this is it's not Air Venturi Avenger specific. There's a zillion different air guns out there that take a magazine like this, and you can do this kind of modification on just about any of them in order to give yourself some additional capacity in terms of the length of the slug or pellet that you're firing. So for starters, stock magazine, I mentioned 46 grains because I have some H&N heavy slugs here, which is a great recent offering from them. Before I was shooting the regular H&N slugs, I think they capped out at around 34 grains. So these go all the way up to 46 grains in 25. And they measure about just under 400 thousandths in length, and they are remarkably consistent. Great quality out of H&N. I found that to be very consistent across the tin. So let me load up a couple of these in, again, the stock magazine. I haven't done anything to this one. I do have the other magazine that I've done this, the modem I'm going to tell you about. I also did the full-on Hajimoto special. If you watch the Hajimoto video online about how he radiused all the corners and softened all the edges, and we drilled out an extra hole in the back to allow for some more preload on the spring. Bone stock, none of that has been done to this magazine. You can hear the pellets still rattling around in there at just under 400 thousandths. The lid moves smoothly enough, and the pellets pop back out. With no trouble. So next I moved up to some JTS dead centers here in 43 grains, but they're longer because of the configuration, whether it's a deeper base or a hollower hollow point, whatever the case may be. These guys measure in at about 420 thousandths. Again, I found that to be very consistent across the tin. It's an impressive pellet. It seems to be very well done. So props to JTS for that. But here is about where I ran into the upper limit of what the stock magazine would take. I'm dragging up against the lid right there in order to get these fed. I'll drop one there, and it'll usually catch when I start to, yep, there we go. So that guy right there is like, come on, get the lid over the top there. Let's see if I can feed one more here. So you gotta be, yep, it dragged there. So what I'm doing in order to kind of help it along is I just press up a little bit with this finger to lift that part of the lid up and over the back of the skirt. as you can hear, there's barely any movement in the pellets, but they do still feed and fire. So there we go. So that's at just around 420 thousandths. Next up were the Zans. I got this sampler pack of Zan slugs that came with a bunch of different weights, which was really cool. The heaviest of which was 45 caliber, or I'm sorry, 45 grains. 45 caliber would probably be a bit much for this exercise. And these suckers right here, again, because of their configuration, whether it's the tail, you can see there's a cut base on that, and maybe a little bit hollow nose for the hollow point. They measure in at around 430 thousandths. And these guys, you try to put them into a stock magazine, and Houston, you're going to have a problem. Barely able to get the lid closed on that, but it's probably because the pellet's sticking out a little bit from the bottom where there's an empty hole. But as soon as there's something solid plastic there, nope, that's about it. And try as I might, no matter how hard I pry up on this lid, it's a pretty stiff, I think, polycarbonate. It doesn't want to go anywhere. So 430 thousandths is no, 420 thousandths is just barely. That's about where your limit lies with the stock magazine. So entered this modification where, as I started to look for how I could increase this, I landed on the lid itself, which is a very hard polycarbonate or some similar material. Like I said, measures almost a little over 90 thousandths thick. So plenty of meat on that bone to work with. And what I ended up doing was taking a 5/16 end mill, chucking it into my drill press, and then making a little wooden jig where the end mill was stationary, but then I was essentially rotating this through, or rotating this around by screwing it into a simple wooden block, and by rotating it around, the end mill was just carving this channel out. Let me see if I can go into the close-up mode here. You can kind of tell where there's a line halfway through of the rough part that I got with the mill and the still kind of clear part that I didn't touch. So if this thing's 90 thousandths thick or 93 thousandths thick, I took off, say, about half of it, 40 to 50 thousandths. A 5/16 end mill over a 25 caliber bullet, or it'd be 4/16, right? So 4/16 is a 1/4 inch or 25 caliber, so that gives you a 32nd on either side of the ass end of your slug, a 32nd in the outer direction, and a 32nd in the inner direction, where you got a nice channel to work with. I suppose you could step it down maybe to 9/32 instead of 5/16. Or whatever the metric equivalent is, but you just got to be a little bit more careful about your tolerances. 5/16 clears the ass end of whatever projectile you're going to use by a country mile, and didn't mess with the inner area where the lid seats on the carousel and the screw comes in, or the outer perimeter where it's it's sealing up against the housing right here. I didn't want to leave a gap right there, so I wanted to make sure that this stayed at the full thickness all the way out here. If you think this is overkill, you're probably right, number one. But number two, with a gun of this power, if I wanted to use pellets instead of slugs, because as a lot of people will tell you online, the barrel for the Avenger is not really set up for slugs. It's got a bit of a choke down towards the muzzle end, and people have had varied results with firing slugs out of it. It's a little bit more picky about that as opposed to pellets. It freaking loves whatever you throw at it. I had heard some great things about the heaviest pellets that I could find in 25 caliber. These Seneca Huntings used to be Yunjin, I guess, and they got rebranded by Pyramid Air or whoever. But these 43.2 grain pellets, they got this pointy nose on them that's wicked long. Come on, focus for me. There you go. And they measure out at 450 thousandths. Rather inconsistently. I found some that were in the 453, 454 range all the way down to, you know, 447 or 448. So almost 5 or 6 thousandths worth of variation in the length, but maybe that's just because the point gets a little bit rounded or something. But anyway, there was no way these were fitting into the stock magazine. And I'd heard such great things about them and didn't want to have to load them one at a time in a single shot tray. That's what spurred me to make this modification as much as the whole slug idea did. So let me show you what this rig looks like. One other thing I wanted to mention in terms of slugs, if you've heard of AVS, the manufacturer there, the guy does a really good job of posting all the information about the slugs on his website. So not only does he have a wide selection in terms of diameters, 249 or 250 or 254, what have you, but with all the different bases that he offers, hollow base, or I'm sorry, like a cup base, a dish base, a flat base, a boat tail, an ogive nose, a hollow point, a solid nose, and he's got the lengths listed down to the thousandths for every single one of them, which is super helpful. In fact, if I took off about 50 thousandths here, which would conceivably give me a capacity of up to 470 thousandths or so, he's got a 60 grain flat base, solid, you know, like not hollow point, round nose slug. I could be firing a 60 grain slug out of a magazine in this 25, which is pretty nuts. So in order to have the ability to do so, though, you got to do this modification. So here's what I've got. This is the rig that I made with a little bit of a clamp. I've got a block of wood underneath here to keep everything parallel, and then another one to make sure that it's sticking up proud from the vise. This screw right here is where I ended up mounting the block with the side that touches the pellet facing up, obviously. And I did a whole bunch of alignment to make sure that the flutes of the end mill were going to fall just right into this channel so that they weren't too far out and they were taking off my outer edge or too far in, interfering with this pin. So it's kind of key that you're going to have that alignment. And then the other key to success here is my drill press has these stops, one on the bottom and one on the top of this the spindle arm here. For each turnaround, and you can see this thing's old, but for each turnaround I've got 100 thousandths. So you know, it ain't as precise as a freaking CNC Bridgeport, but it also didn't cost me 50 grand either. It was good enough for this job. So what I did was I started with it set at the end of this masking tape. You can see it's just, hear that? It's just barely grabbing the teeth on, or the flutes on the bottom of the end mill. So that was essentially my 0 point, and I would just come and feed it down into the piece with it running, give myself 5 or 10 thousandths or so, and then rotate this thing around the screw that it was on, back and forth, holding it nice and steady, holding it down nice and even, and rotating it all the way around in both directions so it hogged out a little bit of a channel. And I come down another 5 or 10 thousandths, lather and repeat, and all the way around until I got to this arrow here, which was my 50 thousandths mark, essentially just on the opposite side of the tape. So from there, about half a turn, essentially that's 50 thousandths worth of negative Z, and it gave me a good enough result in terms of doing the job that I needed. So since I've got one mag that's stock and one mag that I've already modified, I'm going to kill the video for now, and I'll come back once I do all the Hajimoto cleaning up and I have nothing but the lid left, and I'll catch a second video of me actually doing the machining work on this lid, so stay tuned.